Hello, friend. It's good to have you here. The world has dimmed to a whisper. The day has gently tucked itself away, and only this quiet moment lingers. Your breath moves gently, steady as the tide, and the room feels safe like a pause between heartbeats. Tonight, we'll drift backward, far beyond memory, into the times when the world itself almost didn't make it. When fire reigned, when oceans froze, when life small, stubborn, miraculous, clung to survival by a thread. But this isn't a story of endings. It's a story of return, of how the earth keeps finding its balance, again and again. We'll wander through those ancient shadows slowly, tracing how everything fragile endured. And as we do, maybe we'll find a little comfort in knowing that even after disaster, the world keeps breathing. If this quiet corner brings you peace, you can leave a gentle like or subscribe softly so the next story finds its way to you. No hurry. For now, let the air settle around you. Let thought grow light and listen. The world has ended before, and still, here we are. The air in the room has stilled, as if time itself were holding its breath. The walls seem to hum faintly with the quiet weight of memory, and beneath that calm, something older begins to move. We drift downward, not through space, but through time, through the soft layers of the planet's long story, through dust and stone and the slow accumulation of years. Each layer carries a whisper, a trace of a world that once lived, breathed, and was loved by the sea. Listen closely, and you can almost hear them. The tiny, many-legged shuffle of trilobites, the curling glide of ammonites spiraling through green light, the rustle of dragonflies with wings as wide as your hand, the slow tread of lizards that once owned the warmth of sunlit swamps. Their voices are faint now, folded into the rock. Yet the rhythm remains the strange, patient rhythm of extinction and return. The earth has always breathed in cycles, creation and erasure, life and quiet. It never stops moving, even in stillness. If you could stand at the edge of that ancient world, long before trees rose or insects sang, you would see nothing of the familiar. The land would be bare gray plains of rock and sand, swept by wind but untouched by leaf or root. The air would feel heavier, the sky a little hazier, with carbon and light. But beneath that sky, beneath the reach of the waves, the true miracle was happening. It was the Ordovician period. Some 485 million years ago, the world belonged to water. Shallow seas spread across the continents, clear and warm, their surfaces flashing gold beneath the young sun. They were not empty. They were alive in ways almost unimaginable. The ocean floor was a crowded city. Coral-like organisms were busy building the first reefs, fragile cathedrals of limestone that curved and branched, home to endless small lives. Brachiopods clung to the rock, their tiny shells opening and closing like steady, unhurried hearts. Trilobites, those patient, armored wanderers, crawled across the sediment, tracing perfect lines in the sand. They were creatures of purpose, eyes glittering with light from an alien sky. Overhead drifted the nautiloids, elegant hunters propelled by soft jets of water, their shells coiled in spirals like seashell galaxies. They floated through the shallows like thought itself, slow, curious, self-contained. This was an age of invention. Evolution was experimenting with everything it could imagine. There were sea lilies anchored like underwater flowers, arms reaching out to catch drifting food. Creatures shaped like pineapples, armored cylinders that sifted sunlight. Jawless fish gliding like living armor, more instinct than motion. Every form seemed new, as though life itself was daydreaming and sketching ideas in sand and salt. The planet was warm, stable, generous. Gondwana, the great southern continent, rested near the equator. There were no forests, no birds, no scent of soil, but the oceans thrived in their stead. The water was rich with nutrients and light, and almost every inch of the shallows was alive. For millions of years, the earth held its breath in that perfect balance, and life answered in abundance. And then, slowly, that balance shifted. At first, it was nothing, just a faint coolness in the water, a change in the rhythm of the tides. But the planet does not need much to turn its own story. Gondwana began to drift southward, edging toward the pole. Snow, at first a stranger to the earth, began to fall more often. It lingered, white gathered upon white. As ice thickened, it caught the sun's reflection and threw it back into the sky. The planet grew brighter, and with brightness came cold. The albedo effect, this elegant feedback, had begun. More ice meant more reflection. More reflection meant more cold. The warmth that had wrapped the oceans for millions of years began to fade. The great glaciers spread outward from the pole, locking water into their frozen vaults. Sea levels dropped. The shallows that had cradled the reefs became dry land. Coral, starved of its tides, withered in silence. Trilobites, whose small legs once scuttled over endless seafloors, found their world shrinking, cooling, vanishing. It wasn't sudden, not by our measure, but to the ocean, which had known only stability, it was catastrophic. The temperature fell. The air lost its warmth. Even the chemistry of the sea began to change. Carbon dioxide, drawn down by weathering rock and a quieter sky, thinned in the atmosphere. The greenhouse breath of Earth weakened, and the planet shivered. The glaciers grew thick, sprawling across Gondwana like a slow tide of glass. The continents glittered under the sun, but that light could no longer reach the deep. Whole ecosystems began to unravel, not with explosions or storms, but with quiet absence. The food chains faltered. The shallows turned cold. Creatures adapted to warmth found themselves trapped in freezing water or stranded on exposed seabeds. As the world cooled, another invisible danger rose from below. The ocean, once a vast, breathing body, began to hold its breath. Circulation slowed. The deep waters no longer rose to meet the surface. Oxygen no longer reached the dark. The sea began to separate into layers, warm above, cold below, each locked away from the other. In that stillness, the deep ocean suffocated. The scientists call it anoxia, the loss of oxygen, the loss of breath itself. And in that loss came silence. Species that had thrived for millions of years vanished in the dark. Coral frameworks fell apart, leaving skeletal towers like broken cities. Trilobites disappeared from whole regions. The delicate echinoderms, the early ancestors of starfish and urchins, faded to scattered survivors. Over 85% of marine life was gone. What had once been the living heart of the planet had become a quiet, frozen plain. It is strange, perhaps, that death can move so slowly, that a world can end not with an impact, but with a whisper. Yet the earth does not need drama to change. It only needs time. And then, when the cold seemed endless, the pendulum swung again. The planet began to warm. The glaciers melted, and the water they had imprisoned for millennia returned to the sea. The tide came back with force, but this renewal, too, carried its price. The melting ice released floods of nutrients into the water. Algae bloomed in waves so vast they turned the seas green, then black. When those blooms died, Their decay consumed the oxygen that life so desperately needed. The oceans became anoxic again, suffocating not from cold this time, but from excess. The survivors of the Ice Age found themselves drowning in abundance. 2 blows, one after another, the freeze and the flood. It was a rhythm the planet would play again and again in the eons to come. When the Earth finally steadied, the seas were different. The reefs were gone, the shallows empty. The ecosystems that had thrived for tens of millions of years had been stripped bare. The oceans were quiet, too quiet, but not lifeless. A few species endured, small and stubborn. Some clung to deeper waters. Others found refuge along the remaining warm coasts. Life had retreated, but not surrendered. From those survivors, the next world would rise. In time, coral would rebuild. Fish would evolve jaws. The seas, though changed, would fill again with motion and color. The Ordovician extinction had been a great erasure, but it had also cleared the page for something new to be written. The Earth is not cruel when it resets. It is deliberate. It keeps rewriting its story until the rhythm feels right again. The same forces that destroy also create the shifting continents, the restless atmosphere, the balance of ice and sun. In its own slow, patient way, the planet renews itself, using even catastrophe as a kind of brushstroke. If you listen to the silence that follows such endings, it is not empty. Beneath it, there is a pulse, the pulse of survival, the soft stirring of the next beginning. Picture it, glaciers, glittering under a pale sky, melting drop by drop. The water trickles back to the sea, carrying fragments of old worlds with it, bits of coral, grains of sand that once held life. The ocean swells, reclaiming its shape, and beneath its surface, unseen, the first sparks of recovery begin. In that image lies the truth of every extinction. What seems like an ending is often a breath drawn in. The exhale will come later. Life always finds its way back. The Ordovician extinction was the first time Earth learned this lesson. It showed that even without asteroids or fire, the planet could change enough to erase nearly everything, and then quietly begin again. It was a reminder that stability is not the natural state of the world motion is. Balance is only ever borrowed. For a while, the world slept under its ice. Then it woke, changed, and began again. The trilobites did not return, but their patterns, their symmetry, their quiet resilience echo still in the designs of later life. The coral rebuilt itself into new forms. Fish learned to bite. The ocean found its color once more. And even now, across the ages, that rhythm continues: the rise, the fall, the pause, the return. The same rhythm that moved the ancient tides moves in the air around you, in the breath you take. The planet breathes through you, still practicing its oldest pattern: loss, renewal, endurance. The sea remembers, the land remembers. The stones beneath your feet carry the fossils of that first great silence, bearing the proof that nothing truly ends. Not here, not in a world that dreams in cycles. The first time the world nearly ended, it did not burn, it froze. But from that long winter came the seeds of all that followed. And if you let your breath slow now, you can almost feel it, the quiet persistence of life waiting beneath the ice, holding on, patient as the dark, ready to bloom again. This quiet endurance echoes in the Ordovician seas, where the water itself seems to carry the memory of that ancient cold. When life finally begins to stir once more, it does so softly, like the first tentative whispers of movement in the depths. These early signs of life, faint but determined, are the first stirrings of a world returning to itself. Yet, the planet is not finished testing its resilience. The long breath of extinction comes again, this time in two great waves, each pulse a reminder of the fragility of life. These pulses echo through time, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, once faltering, now steady but slower, weaker, and yet undeniably alive. The first pulse came with the ice. As glaciers spread and temperatures dropped, the oceans retreated from the coasts. Warm shallows turned to air, and the reefs that had once teemed with life dried and cracked under pale sunlight. Whole kingdoms of coral and shell vanished beneath the cold. The second pulse struck during the thaw. When the glaciers melted, sea levels rose again, flooding what had only just emerged. But the water that returned was not the same. Its chemistry had changed. The balance of oxygen and nutrients was broken. The deep seas grew dark and breathless once more, and the survivors of the cold found themselves facing another kind of death, one that moved through the water like a quiet suffocation. Each wave took more than the one before. The first left life bruised, the second nearly empty. The fossil record preserves that rhythm of loss in silence. A band of rock, rich with shells and coral, followed by a sudden emptiness, then a few faint traces of something struggling to begin again. Graptolites, delicate, colonial drifters that once floated in uncountable numbers, virtually disappeared. Their fine, feathered skeletons had once marked every layer of the ancient sea, so common that scientists now use them to tell time. But in this story, their record ends abruptly. Brachiopods, the steadfast filter feeders of the seafloor, dwindled to a shadow of their former variety. Trilobites, the icons of ancient oceans, suffered wave after wave of loss. Some lineages vanished completely. Others clung to survival in hidden corners, where the cold and chaos could not reach. Yet even in the bleakest moment, life refused to vanish entirely. A few species, small and stubborn, endured the cold, the suffocation, the shifting tides. Some found refuge in deeper waters, where conditions changed more slowly. Others sheltered near the equator, where the warmth lingered. These quiet survivors became the seeds of everything that followed the roots of the next age. The Ordovician extinction, though less famous than the fall of the dinosaurs, was far more devastating. More than 4 out of every 5 marine species disappeared. No asteroids fell. No volcanoes split the sky. The catastrophe came from within the planet, turning slowly upon itself, its balance tipping, its breath changing. There is something eerie about a disaster born of stillness. It reminds us that Earth does not need fury to change its face. It only needs time. A continent drifting toward the pole, an ocean cooling, a fraction less carbon in the air, and the world remakes itself. The quiet forces are often the most powerful ones. The tilt of a planet, the pull of a current, the slow rearrangement of what lives and what dies. Even so, the sea was never truly silent. Some graptolites drifted on. A few trilobites continued their patient march along the seabed. The last coral fragments clung to rock as the waters slowly found their warmth again. Layer by layer, the planet began to settle. The air softened, the ice retreated, the seas rose, and into that fragile calm, life crept once more. The Silurian period dawned like a slow sunrise after a long night. Around 443 million years ago, the glaciers melted, flooding the empty plains where reefs had once stood. The oceans returned, filling the craters of extinction with water and possibility. These new seas were different, richer in minerals, a little murkier, less stable, but they offered room to grow. Into them came the survivors, those hardy creatures that had waited in the dark. They were not magnificent, they were not many, but they were enough. Simple brachiopods anchored themselves again to the rocks, filtering what food they could find. Crinoids, those feather-armed relatives of sea stars, rose from the sand, waving gently like underwater ferns. Trilobites, battered but not beaten, returned to their quiet foraging. Graptolites reappeared in the drifting plankton, fewer than before, but still carrying the thread of continuity through the water's column. They were the first notes of a new song, a song not of triumph, but of persistence. The Silurian seas were healing. Slowly, the coral returned, though these were not the same as before. The reefs were now built by tabulate and rugose corals, ancient architects that shaped their limestone homes with patient precision. They made new structures, walls and terraces, for other creatures to inhabit. These reefs were smaller, humbler, but full of promise. Where death had swept clean, creation began again. Life above the water was changing too. Along the edges of the sea, where waves met stone and sediment, something green began to grow. Tiny plants, spore-bearing and fragile, clung to damp shorelines. They had no leaves, no flowers, only thin stems, and the courage to face the air. But they had discovered something precious, vascular tissue, the ability to draw water through their bodies and hold it there. It meant they could stand taller, last longer, and reach places where the sea could not follow. The first breath of land was not animal, but plant, a whisper of green across the gray. These pioneers stabilized the soil, softened the weathering of rock, and ever so slightly changed the air itself. They began to draw down carbon dioxide, cooling the planet once more. But in balance this time, the Earth was learning how to breathe differently. Every blade of green, no matter how small, was a quiet act of transformation. Underwater, new experiments were beginning. With so many species gone, entire ecological roles lay empty. Evolution loves an empty space. It fills it with invention. In the Silurian, that invention took the shape of something revolutionary: jaws. Fish had existed for millions of years, but they had been simple things: jawless, armored, slow. The arrival of jaws changed everything. It was a new way to feed, to hunt, to survive. Instead of scraping and filtering, creatures could now grasp and bite. The ocean grew teeth. The first jawed fish were the placoderms, broad-headed, heavily plated animals, their bodies wrapped in bone like knights in armor. They were powerful, direct, and entirely new. Where they swam, smaller creatures learned to hide. Evolution had discovered predation in its modern form. Not long after came the acanthodians, sometimes called spiny sharks. Sleeker, faster, lighter. They were the prototypes for everything that would follow. Sharks, rays, tuna, even the fish that would one day breathe air. From this point forward, the ocean was never the same. The Silurian seas were alive again, and this time they had tension, purpose, pursuit. Life had teeth, and the world began to move differently. Yet even amid this resurgence, the planet remained gentle. There were no vast jungles, no loud chaos, only a quiet rebuilding. The reefs grew taller, layer by layer. Sea scorpions, eurypterids, prowled the shallows, their armored bodies glinting in dim light. Some grew longer than a person, their claws poised to snatch whatever drifted too close. They were monsters by our measure, but simply participants in the ongoing rehearsal of survival. The Silurian was not a grand age. It was an age of restoration, of cautious experiments and fragile victories, but out of its modesty came the foundations of everything to follow. When life returned from the edge, it did so more creatively than before. New body plans appeared, new relationships formed. The food chains grew deeper, more intricate. The stage of Earth's story had been reset, and the actors were learning their lines again. Why does renewal so often follow catastrophe? Perhaps because emptiness invites imagination. When the dominant species vanish, they leave behind open space habitats unoccupied, food chains with missing links, skies and seas with room to grow. Evolution responds the way an artist does when handed a blank canvas, with curiosity and without fear. In a stable world, change is cautious. In a broken one, it is bold. When nothing is certain, everything becomes possible. Traits that once seemed useless become tools for survival. A jaw that can bite, a fin that can paddle, a stalk that can stand a little taller. These are the quiet rebellions that rebuild a planet. The Silurian period was full of these gentle revolutions. It wasn't an explosion of life, but a steady, rising hum. Ecosystems slowly knotted themselves back together. It took millions of years for diversity to reach its old heights, and even longer for the balance to return. Some groups never recovered, others took unexpected turns. But life, as always, found ways to endure and to transform. By the time the next age arrived, the Devonian the Earth was ready for something entirely new. Around 419 million years ago, the oceans shimmered with fish of every shape and color. Reefs stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Rainforests of the sea long before there were any on land. Above the water, green had spread far and wide. What began as mossy mats had grown into forests of towering lycophytes and ferns, their roots anchoring deep into the soil. The air was changing again, richer now with oxygen, cleaner with every breath of leaf. Insects appeared, small and curious, creeping through the damp shadows. Millipede-like creatures traced lines between roots. Simple, wingless insects began to feed on decaying matter. The first small animals had arrived on land, and they found it not hostile, but full of possibility. The Devonian was a time of confidence. The seas were full, the land was greening, and life seemed unstoppable. But the planet never holds a balance for long. Beneath the shimmer of coral and the rustle of leaves, a new instability was beginning. The same forests that gave the air its freshness also altered the Earth's chemistry. Roots dug deep, weathering rock, drawing down carbon dioxide, cooling the climate again. Rain carried nutrients from land to sea, where they fed blooms of algae that devoured oxygen as they decayed. Slowly, the oceans began to choke. The Devonian extinction did not strike in a single blow. It was a prolonged unraveling, a series of pulses, each one claiming more than the last. Reefs collapsed, fish vanished. The once intricate webs of life, which had seemed so secure, began to disintegrate, one thread at a time. The golden age of the oceans dimmed, replaced by a simpler, quieter world. Yet, even in this drawn-out catastrophe, the cycle of destruction and renewal remained unchanged. The survivors of the Devonian, those who endured the upheaval, would eventually give rise to amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The very forests that had poisoned the sea would, over time, breathe oxygen into the air, creating an environment ripe for new life to take root. From the wreckage of one age, the next began to breathe. In a strange, comforting way, it is reassuring to see this rhythm repeating itself, the fall and rise, the breaking and mending. The Ordovician froze the seas, the Silurian thawed them, the Devonian greened the land. Each ending carved a space for something new to emerge. And in that quiet space left behind, the world had taken a long, uneven breath. The once vibrant Devonian seas, teeming with life, had thinned to a hushed gray. The coral cities that had risen to great heights were now gone, their limestone towers toppled by time and the shifting tides of chemistry. The armored fish, once rulers of the waters, had drifted toward extinction, their bones now sinking into silt. But even within this hush, there was movement, a small, persistent stir. Life, ever resilient, began to find its way forward again. The Devonian extinction did not arrive as a single blow. It came slowly, a long ache rather than a wound, a decline that stretched over 20 million years. It was as if the planet had caught an illness it could not shake, waxing and waning in strength. Periods of calm gave false hope, followed by new losses. Each wave of collapse took a little more color from the oceans, until even the light seemed tired. And still, life lingered, waiting for its chance to begin again. What makes the Devonian so haunting is not only how much it destroyed, but how gently it did it. It wasn't an apocalypse in fire or ice, but a quiet suffocation, a slow unraveling of balance. The seas grew shallow and strange. The air cooled. The chemistry of the planet shifted beneath the feet or fins of those who lived through it. And yet, inside that drawn-out crisis, evolution was already at work, rearranging the pieces it had left. The great predators of the earlier Devonian, those armored placoderms with jaws like guillotines, were dying out. They had been the kings of the ocean, heavy and invincible. But their size, their armor, their very mastery became their weakness. As the waters lost oxygen, the great fish that needed the most of it were the first to falter. Their dominance had left no room for the nimble, the adaptable, the small. The extinction opened that space. It cleared the field for fresh experiments. Evolution, for all its patience, needs room to think. There is something eerie about a catastrophe that makes way for creation. The Devonian felt less like a tragedy and more like a great reset, an undoing that prepared the stage for something new. The oceans did not roar back to life overnight, but in the silence that followed, tiny victories began to unfold. Among them was a modest family of lobe-finned fish. They were not fast or fearsome, but their fins hid a quiet secret, bones sturdy enough to bear weight. With those bones, they could push themselves up from the seafloor, prop against mud, and lift their eyes just above the surface of water. It was not yet walking, not even crawling, but it was a beginning. In time, their descendants would breathe air, climb onto land, and look out upon a world still fragile but full of promise. The Devonian collapse did not erase the blueprint of life. It redrew it. The forests that had helped trigger the crisis by pulling carbon from the air would go on to sculpt the planet's very shape. The fish that barely survived would give rise to every creature that would one day step onto the shore. Out of the long illness came recovery, not immediate, not easy, but inevitable. It's easy to imagine trees as calm and benevolent things, tall, wise, and gentle. But during the Devonian, trees were newcomers, ambitious, disruptive, and a little reckless. They had just learned how to stand tall, and they were changing everything. If you were a trilobite or a coral, the arrival of trees might have felt less like grace and more like sabotage. They didn't mean to cause trouble, of course, but their roots ran deep, and in reaching down, they cracked open the foundations of the world. The Middle to Late Devonian, roughly 390 to 360 million years ago, was a time of transformation. The continents were wrapped in warmth, fringed with shallow seas. The land was no longer barren. Mosses and liverworts had already softened the stone with green, but now came the vascular plants, the ones that could grow tall. They had roots that anchored them firmly in the soil, woody tissue that lifted them toward the light, and veins that carried water like a heartbeat. Among these pioneers was Archaeopteris, one of the first true trees. It rose more than 20 meters high, with branches like open hands and fronds that reached for sunlight. The first forests formed dense, shaded, still. They were unlike anything Earth had ever seen. No birds called from the canopy. No animals rustled below. But they were forests nonetheless, alive with the sound of wind through leaves that had never existed before. The roots of these new giants began to dig into the Earth's crust, and in doing so, they changed it forever. As they grew, they split stone, releasing minerals into the soil. They secreted acids that dissolved rock and unlocked nutrients, phosphorus, calcium, iron. To the trees, it was nourishment. To the planet, it was a chemical revolution. The process, called biological weathering, altered the flow of carbon between land, sea, and sky. When rain fell, slightly acidic from the carbon dioxide it absorbed from the air, it reacted with these freshly exposed minerals. The result was a series of slow, invisible reactions that bound carbon into stone. Over time, vast amounts of CO2 were pulled from the atmosphere. The air cooled, the climate shifted. The trees, by simply being themselves, had changed the temperature of the world. But that was only the beginning. The weathered soils, rich in nutrients, began to wash into rivers, then into the sea. Phosphorus and nitrogen, life's fertilizers, poured into the shallows. The ocean, always eager to grow, responded with abundance. Algae bloomed in thick, green clouds. At first, it must have seemed like a gift. More food for fish, more energy for life. But the bloom was followed by decay. When those vast mats of algae died, they sank to the bottom, and as they decomposed, they consumed oxygen. The seas began to suffocate. The deep waters turned dark, heavy with carbon and devoid of breath. The fossil record still bears witness in layers of black shale sediments laid down in anoxic seas where life had gone still. The reefs collapsed. The filter feeders vanished. Even the swimmers could not escape. The ocean's lungs had failed, and in their place rose silence. The trees had not meant to cause such harm. They were only growing, stretching, taking their place in the story. But in doing so, they had rewritten it. They had cooled the air, fertilized the sea, and tipped the balance of life. It was the first known example of what we might call unintended consequence. An organism reshaping its planet by accident. There is a strange humor in it. If one looks kindly, imagine a Devonian fish whispering to another. The water feels different, doesn't it? Yes, comes the reply. Must be the trees. It sounds absurd, but that was the truth. The quiet rise of plants on land had shaken the seas to their core. The trees were, in their own way, the planet's first engineers. They altered the flow of carbon, the chemistry of rivers, even the rhythm of fire. With more plant matter covering the land and oxygen levels climbing, wildfires began to burn across the continents. Charcoal deposits from that time mark the Earth's first blazes. The planet was learning to burn, and with that, to renew. By greening the continents, the trees had turned the world into a living machine, land, sea, and air woven into one continuous system. And when one part changed, all the others followed. The Devonian was not an age of villains. only of complexity. The forests did not destroy the reefs out of malice. They simply made the world more interconnected, and that connection proved fragile. Yet even through loss, life found its way. Some creatures adapted to the deep, where oxygen levels were steadier. Others evolved new strategies to survive in the shallows. Slower metabolisms, better gills, bodies built for scarcity. The plants themselves continued to evolve, their roots reaching deeper, their stems thicker, their leaves more complex. Insects began to follow, tiny explorers crawling among stems, feeding, hiding, changing. And at the water's edge, the lobe-finned fish were learning new tricks. Their fins, strengthened by bone, became limbs in miniature. They could push against the mud, raise their heads into air, take a breath, and lower themselves again. It was clumsy, awkward, full of effort, but it worked. In that small act of struggle, life discovered land. These early tetrapods, four-limbed creatures, part fish, part amphibian, were the first to bridge the divide between water and air. They had lungs as well as gills. They could wriggle across riverbanks, lay eggs in shallow pools, and rest beneath the shade of the forests that had nearly destroyed the seas. In the great rhythm of balance and reversal, the forests that caused extinction also created the conditions for life to spread beyond the waves. Were the trees villains then? Probably not. They were, rather, the first storytellers of the complex earth we know today. They showed how life, in trying to survive, can change the planet itself. They were the first terraformers, the quiet revolutionaries who did not just inhabit the world but rewrote its rules. While the seas suffered, the land began to bloom. What was lost below was gained above. The earth was diversifying its experiment. As the extinction pulses slowed, the oceans emptied of their armored titans. The great placoderms, once invincible, could not withstand the changing chemistry. Their massive bodies demanded too much oxygen. Their heavy armor made them slow, their world too unstable. One by one, they disappeared, their lineage ending in silence. In their absence, smaller, lighter creatures rose. The ray-finned fish, flexible, quick, adaptable, slipped into the spaces the giants had left behind. Their fins, built on delicate rays rather than muscle and bone, gave them speed and precision. They could maneuver through currents, change depths, and thrive in both fresh and salt water. From these survivors, the oceans would one day fill again, with everything from sardines to swordfish, seahorses to sharks. The lobe-finned fish endured as well. They were fewer, slower, but inside their bodies lay the blueprint of something extraordinary. Their fins contained bones, the ancestors of wrists and ankles, fingers and toes. Their lungs, crude but functional, would become the breath of land animals. They were evolution's bridge builders, carrying the ocean's memory into the air. From their ranks came the first true tetrapods, those brave wanderers who left the water behind. They were not majestic at first, just damp, awkward beings shuffling between pools. But they carried with them the promise of everything that would one day walk, crawl, leap, and sing. Even amphibians, their close kin, joined this slow exodus. They were creatures of both worlds, laying eggs in water, but living much of their lives above it. They thrived in the swamps and forests of the recovering planet, proof that adaptability, not strength, is the true measure of survival. The Devonian extinction was an evolutionary bottleneck, a narrow gate through which only a few could pass. But on the other side of that gate lay opportunity. The small, the quick, the flexible, The resilient, they were the ones who inherited the earth. And in the time that followed, life surged again. The Carboniferous period dawned, humid and lush. Forests grew thick, stitching continents together with roots and shadow. Oxygen filled the air until insects grew enormous, their wings humming like violins. Amphibians flourished in wetland labyrinths. The vertebrates that had survived the Devonian now multiplied in shapes and sizes beyond imagining. The Devonian had thinned the ranks, but it had not broken the story. It had simply pared it down to its essentials: simplicity, endurance, adaptability. From that lean beginning, new complexity would grow. Every fall carries the seeds of what rises next. The forests that cooled the earth became the cradle of air-breathing life. The fish that crawled from the shallows became the ancestors of every creature with a spine. The extinction that hollowed the seas made room for the world we know. When the Devonian finally gave way to the lush Carboniferous, the planet was greener, more oxygen-rich, more alive than ever before. The silence had passed. The whisper of wind through leaves had become the Earth's new voice. And so the pattern continued, the rhythm of loss and renewal, of endings that are never truly endings. From the quiet persistence of fish to the deep ambition of forests, life had once again remade the planet. The water still remembers the bones that first lifted from its depths, and the land hums with the memory of roots that cracked stone to carve out a place for themselves. The world had stumbled, yet it stood again. And somewhere, on a damp riverbank beneath a canopy of fern-like trees, a small creature with lungs full of new air took its first hesitant step into the next age of Earth's long dream. But just as life had begun to rebuild, a new and far darker chapter awaited. The world had ended before, but never quite like this. Around 252 million years ago, the planet entered its darkest night. A night that stretched not for hours, but for millennia. The seas boiled, the air soured, and the land cracked beneath skies that burned a deep, unsettling red. In the vast chronicle of Earth's extinctions, this one stands apart. It was not a pruning of the tree of life, it was the axe to its trunk. Scientists call it the Permian-Triassic extinction event. History remembers it as the Great Dying. It was the most complete undoing of life the world has ever seen. Over 90% of all marine species vanished. 70% of creatures that walked or crawled on land followed. Entire ecosystems ceased to exist. Reefs, forests, insect kingdoms, all gone. The silence that followed was not the stillness of peace, but the silence of a planet gasping for breath. It did not happen in a single day. There was no asteroid to blame, no sudden flash of skyfire. The Great Dying was a slow unmaking, a fever that spread across oceans and continents, fueled by the planet itself. The story began with Pangaea, the great supercontinent that gathered nearly all of Earth's land into one colossal mass. It stretched from pole to pole, surrounded by the vast Panthalassic Ocean. From space, it would have looked like an enormous scar dividing blue. Life clung mostly to the coasts. The interior was parched, dry, and seasonal, a landscape of endless desert, where heat rose from the sand in shimmering waves. With the continents so tightly joined, ocean currents shifted, climates grew unstable, and the air hung heavy with imbalance. But imbalance alone does not cause extinction. For that, something extraordinary is required. Something that reaches into every corner of the planet's system and turns it against itself. That something came from deep within the Earth. In the region we now call Siberia, the planet's crust cracked open in 1,000 places and fire poured out. For nearly 1 million years, Volcanic fury reshaped the surface of the world. This was not a single mountain erupting. It was the birth of a landscape. The Siberian Traps, named for their stair-stepped layers of basalt, were a flood of molten stone covering more than 7 million square kilometers an area, twice the size of India, layered kilometers thick. Imagine rivers of lava stretching to every horizon, cooling only to be covered again by new flows. And with every eruption came breath. The hot, invisible breath of carbon and sulfur, exhaled by the planet in catastrophic quantities. Volcanic gases filled the sky: carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, methane, and more. The chemistry of the air began to warp. Carbon dioxide trapped heat in the atmosphere, setting off a greenhouse surge so swift that the oceans warmed by several degrees. Sulfur dioxide mixed with water vapor to form sulfuric acid, raining back down in burning sheets that stripped nutrients from the soil and scorched young forests. The earth was suffocating itself. The seas, which had long served as the planet's lungs, began to fail. Warm water holds less oxygen than cold, and as the temperature climbed, oxygen levels plummeted. Circulation faltered. The deep oceans grew still, stagnant, heavy with gases. The surface shimmered under sunlight, but beneath that sheen, life could no longer breathe. Coral reefs collapsed, their intricate structures dissolving into rubble. Shelled creatures that had survived for hundreds of millions of years simply stopped appearing in the record. Even the trilobites, those ancient, stubborn wanderers that had endured every catastrophe before, met their final end. Some scientists believe the heating seas awoke something ancient and terrible: bacteria that fed not on oxygen, but on sulfur. These microbes produced hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells of rot and kills without warning. Released in great quantities, it could have risen from the oceans into the air, tainting coastlines with invisible poison. In the upper atmosphere, hydrogen sulfide reacts with sunlight, eroding the ozone layer. With that shield weakened, ultraviolet light would have poured through the sky like a second sun, burning the skin of animals, bleaching plants, sterilizing soil. It was as if every system that sustained life had conspired, all at once, to erase it. On land, the forests fell quiet. Acid rain stripped leaves from trees. The great conifers of the late Permian, once tall and endless, collapsed into tangled decay. Rivers filled with the remains of vegetation, choking the waterways. Amphibians, already struggling in the heat, withered in the changing air. Reptiles fared little better. Whole families of creatures disappeared without leaving descendants. This was not a single catastrophe, but a cascade of them. Volcanism triggered climate change. Climate change reshaped ocean currents. The oceans released methane, which deepened the warming, which worsened the volcanism. Each feedback loop fed the next, and the planet spun toward ruin. For perhaps 100,000 years, the great dying rolled on. There were brief reprieves, times when the eruptions paused, when the skies cleared slightly, and life seemed to hold its breath. But the respite never lasted. The fever returned, each wave stronger than the one before. When it finally ended, the earth was a stranger to itself. Coral reefs gone, ferns and forests gone. The skies clearer now, yes, but empty. The sound of insects gone too. Even they, the eternal opportunists, were nearly extinguished. And yet, life has a strange way of whispering, even when the chorus falls silent. A few species, small and stubborn, managed to endure. Some burrowed deep underground, hiding from the heat and poison. Others sheltered in the ocean's cooler depths, where oxygen still lingered in narrow bands. Among the survivors was a creature called Lystrosaurus. Imagine something like a broad, pig-sized reptile with a beak-like mouth and a pair of tusks curving down from its face. It was not beautiful, not swift, but it was durable. It could dig. It could eat almost anything. It could tolerate heat and drought. When the dust settled, Lystrosaurus was everywhere from Africa to Antarctica. Its fossils scatter like stubborn footprints across the recovering Earth. For a time, this odd little creature made up nearly 90% of all land animals. In a world of collapse, it was the quiet monarch of survival. The oceans, too, held onto a few slivers of life: bony fish, small mollusks, microscopic plankton. Fragile things, but enough. From these fragments, evolution would rebuild. The age of the reptiles, of dinosaurs, birds, and mammals would rise from this ashes. It is hard to grasp the scale of such loss. We measure it in numbers, in percentages, but numbers cannot hold the weight of a world's silence. To imagine the great dying is to imagine Earth itself forgetting what it means to live. Still, even in that forgetting, something remained. Genes persisted, cells divided, breath continued. However faint, the thread of life held. The Permian world had been lush and strange, teeming seas, vast forests, continents stitched together. The Triassic world that followed was raw, bare, and new. The planet looked like a place trying to remember itself. The soil was poor, the air dry, but the seed of renewal was already stirring. The lesson of the great dying is not only about destruction, it is about connection. A single force, deep in the mantle, can ripple outward until the entire surface trembles. Lava feeds the sky with carbon. Carbon warms the air. Warmth stills the ocean. The ocean releases gas. The gas breaks the ozone. Every layer touches the next. The Earth is one enormous breathing system, and when it shudders, everything shudders with it. There is a kind of quiet terror in realizing that no asteroid was needed, no cosmic accident, no alien strike, just the planet turning inward, exhaling too much of itself. But perhaps the greater wonder is this: even after losing nearly everything, life did not end. It endured. It adapted. It started again with what little was left: a burrowing reptile here, a patch of algae there. The spark refused to go out. The planet had been through fire, through poison, through airless heat. It had walked to the edge of emptiness and turned back. When the great dying faded and the Triassic dawned, the world was scarred but open. The ecosystems that returned were simpler at first: low forest, shallow seas, but each year added texture. The air cooled slightly. Rain began to fall more often. The Earth's fever broke. From the survivors, new empires would rise. The ancestors of mammals, the synapsids, diversified again, smaller, quicker, more adaptable. From another lineage came the archosaurs, creatures that would one day give rise to crocodiles, birds, and the dinosaurs themselves. The Earth's story is not one of endless doom, but of renewal through hardship. The great dying was the hardest reset in the history of life, a forced reboot that erased nearly everything, then left space for imagination. The forests that grew afterward were not the same. The seas that refilled were different colors, but they were alive, and that was enough. There is something humbling about the idea that the world has nearly ended not once, but many times, and that each ending was also a beginning. From volcanic fire, new minerals formed. From acid rain, new soils. From extinction, new possibilities. In that sense, the Great Dying was not a tragedy, but a transformation. The planet exhaled its pain, and after a long silence, inhaled again. The Triassic would bring the first dinosaurs, the first true mammals, the first coral reefs reborn. It would bring forests back to the land and life back to the sea. The air would fill once more with wings and songs, the water with movement. But before that, there was only quiet, the kind of quiet that holds the weight of survival. If you could stand on that new world, just after the lava cooled, you'd see a landscape half burned, half born. The rocks still warm underfoot, the rivers running thick with ash, and between them, here and there, a small green shoot. A creature digging in the dust, a ripple in the shallows, proof that even when the earth collapses into its own fire, it remembers how to heal. The Great Dying was the closest the planet ever came to true silence. And still, the story went on, because Earth does not fear endings, it understands them. Every extinction, no matter how complete, is just a pause before breath returns. Every silence is only waiting for the next voice to rise. And so, the Great Dying had ended, but the world it left behind was still a mere whisper of its former self. Forests had thinned to scattered patches of stubborn green. The oceans had fallen silent, their once vibrant symphonies of life now replaced by the faint hum of bacteria and drifting silt. Yet, even in that deep quiet, one creature moved steadily through the dust, a reminder that life, even at its most fragile, has an uncanny talent for endurance. That creature was Lystrosaurus, the unassuming hero of Earth's recovery. Fossil beds from the early Triassic are filled with its remains entire plains of ancient bone and tusked skulls. In some places, 9 out of every 10 vertebrate fossils belong to this one animal. Imagine that, a single species, so ordinary in appearance, becoming the dominant vertebrate on land. It wasn't fierce or graceful or clever. It was simply enough, tough enough, patient enough, adaptable enough to survive a world that had come apart at the seams. Its secret was simplicity. Lystrosaurus was a generalist herbivore, which is a poetic way of saying it ate whatever didn't eat it first. Tough stems, wiry ferns, dry roots, it could make a meal out of almost anything that grew. When the heat became unbearable or the air thin, it burrowed. Its squat, barrel-shaped body and short legs were made for digging, and below the surface it found refuge from both scorching sun and poisonous wind. Some paleontologists suspect it had a particularly efficient respiratory system, capable of pulling what little oxygen the thin Triassic atmosphere could offer. It didn't demand much, and in a broken world, that was the key to survival. While Lystrosaurus trudged over the barren land, the oceans were relearning how to breathe. The once crowded reefs, those dazzling underwater cities, had vanished. The intricate shells and skeletons of their inhabitants dissolved into chalky dust. The deep sea was empty, a motionless black plain. Yet, as always, the first to return were the smallest. On the seafloor, microbial mats spread like living blankets. Thick, rubbery carpets of bacteria and algae stitched the sediments together. These were ancient beings, descendants of the microscopic pioneers that had once shaped Earth's earliest oceans billions of years before. They didn't need complexity. They thrived in stillness, weaving chemistry into structure, exhaling oxygen in tiny, steady sighs. Their slow, patient work began to reassemble the foundation of marine ecosystems. Above them, small bivalves and gastropods crept back into being. The seas filled with faint motion again, a ripple here, a drifting shell there. A few coiled ammonoids, the distant kin of modern squids, floated through the open waters like delicate paper lanterns. Fish, too, began to return, cautious and sparse at first. Each species, a fragile new experiment in the long recovery. It would take millions of years before the seas regained any kind of richness. For a long stretch of time, biodiversity hovered near zero, a world reduced to its most basic patterns. But these small beginnings mattered. Every microbial mat, every timid shell, was a stitch in the long, slow mending of Earth's tapestry. Life, fumbling through the dark, was finding the light switch again. On land, the pattern was similar, a fragile recoloring of the gray. Plants returned in patches, thin and uneven. The lush forests of the Permian were gone, replaced by sparser vegetation and long stretches of open plain. In the hotter and drier regions, only the hardiest survived: ferns, lycopods, and the first gymnosperms, ancestors of modern conifers. Their roots gripped the eroding soil, holding what little earth remained against the wind. In many places, vegetation was so thin that the ground itself became restless. Without roots to hold it, rain stripped away the topsoil, clogging rivers with mud. Floodplains turned to sludge. Forests struggled to take hold. The planet looked scarred and tentative, as if afraid to commit to green again. And yet, through that uncertainty, evolution began to dream. The extinction had emptied so many ecological niches that new possibilities opened like doors in a darkened hall. With the old giants gone, the survivors could explore, change, and grow without competition. Nature became experimental again. Among the first to seize the opportunity were the archosaurs, an ambitious family of reptiles that would, in time, give the world dinosaurs, crocodiles, and birds. In the beginning, they were modest, slender-bodied creatures with quick limbs and long tails, darting between ferns and feeding on insects. But within their design was the blueprint of future empires. At the same time, another group, the cynodonts, or dog-toothed reptiles, were quietly at work on a different evolutionary path. They were small, warm-blooded, covered perhaps in the faint beginnings of fur. They hunted at night, when the larger reptiles slept, and raised their young with care. From their ranks, much later, would come mammals. This was life's great paradox at work. Catastrophe breeds creativity. The fewer the survivors, the freer the possibilities. With fewer mouths to feed and fewer rivals to outcompete, the remaining lineages evolved at breathtaking speed, filling roles that had been wiped clean. The biosphere was rebuilding itself not through dominance, but through diversity. The recovery was slow, achingly slow. For 5 to 10 million years, Earth remained a world of scarcity. But each generation carried forward a little more variation. A few new tricks, another chance at balance. Bit by bit, the planet remembered its own abundance. By the Middle Triassic, about 245 million years ago, life had begun to look familiar again. Green returned to the coastlines. Forests of conifers and seed ferns took root, painting the land in muted tones of olive and gold. Rivers cleared, insects buzzed, and vertebrates prowled once more beneath the canopy. The world was not lush yet, but it was alive, and that was enough. Across Pangaea, the single vast continent that still dominated the planet, life began to reassemble itself. The interior remained brutal, scorched in summer, frozen in winter, but along the coasts, Where humidity and shade offered reprieve, the old rhythms return. The forests grew taller, the air thicker with spores and resin. Amphibians lingered in the shallows, reptiles hunted across the plains, and insects, the quiet engineers of ecosystems, found their footing again. It was during this long recovery that the ancestors of modern crocodiles appeared. Sleek and semi-aquatic, they were efficient hunters, at home both in water and on land. Their armored cousins, the etosaurs, shuffled through the underbrush, their bodies plated like tanks. The air hummed with dragonflies and beetles, and somewhere in the mix, unnoticed, small two-legged reptiles were beginning to rise on their hind limbs and run. These were the first dinosaurs, not giants, not rulers, yet just quick, bird-like creatures scurrying between shadows, eating insects and avoiding predators far larger than themselves. The world did not yet know their name. The Triassic was a time of experimentation, a testing ground for ideas. Life was sketching new forms, revising old blueprints, seeing what worked. The crocodile cousins ruled for a time, their dominance steady and unquestioned. The dinosaurs remained background players, small, nervous, waiting. If history had stopped there, they might have stayed that way, another forgotten branch on the tree of life. But the earth, restless as always, had one more reshuffling to perform. Around 200 million years ago, the calm began to fracture again. The fossil record shows a sudden drop in biodiversity, whole families of creatures disappearing, insect populations thinning, marine reptiles vanishing from the seas. The cause, once again, was the Earth itself. Beneath the crust, the continents of Pangaea were beginning to split apart. Cracks opened, deep and wide, as molten rock surged upward from below. This immense volcanic upheaval, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, or CAMP, was one of the largest eruptions in Earth's history. It stretched from modern North America to Africa, from Brazil to Europe, a wound across the world's surface. For hundreds of thousands of years, these eruptions poured lava and gas into the atmosphere, releasing unimaginable quantities of carbon dioxide. The sky thickened with haze. The climate lurched into chaos. As temperatures rose, weather patterns shifted violently. Drought gripped the interiors, while the poles thawed. Acid rain fell again, bleaching leaves and poisoning rivers. The same pattern unfolded once more. Warming seas, vanishing oxygen, disrupted food chains. The old empires of reptiles and amphibians collapsed. Entire clades of archosaurs disappeared, leaving behind only their smaller, more adaptable cousins. And in that vacuum, at last, the dinosaurs stepped forward. From the survivors of this new extinction rose the rulers of the next age. The Triassic closed not with silence, but with a new chorus, the sound of feet on fresh soil, of wings yet to come. The Earth had remembered how to live again. After the great upheaval of the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, the Earth was a fractured and quiet world, still trembling from the volcanic eruptions that had reshaped its atmosphere and landscapes. The recovery wasn't a grand, immediate return to former glories. It was a patient and often chaotic rebuilding, one small step at a time. Ocean temperatures climbed, and the atmosphere thickened with carbon dioxide, pushing the planet into yet another warming phase. Weather patterns shifted with increasing unpredictability. Some regions became wetter, others drier, as rainfall intensified in some areas, while deserts expanded in others. Seasonal extremes grew more pronounced, making life even more unpredictable and harsh for the survivors of the previous extinction. The ecosystems that had only just begun to stabilize after the Permian extinction now faced another round of pressure. But it wasn't just the heat that pushed life to the edge. It was the increase in carbon dioxide levels that caused another crisis: ocean acidification. As the oceans absorbed more CO2 from the atmosphere, the water's chemistry began to change. The dissolved carbon dioxide combined with water to form carbonic acid, which lowered the pH of the seas. Creatures that had built their bodies from calcium carbonate, like mollusks and plankton, began to suffer. Their shells and skeletons couldn't form properly in the increasingly acidic waters. And with this acidification came another blow to the marine food chains. Without strong, healthy shells to protect them, the very foundation of marine life began to crumble. Once again, life on Earth was tested by a combination of heat, toxic gases, and unstable chemistry. It wasn't as catastrophic as the Permian extinction, but it still caused significant losses. Large land reptiles, including many Arosaur relatives, disappeared, along with a number of amphibian species. The oceans lost many of their top predators, and the coral reefs that had begun to recover were again reduced to rubble. Earth was once again teetering on the brink of ecological collapse. But, as it has often done, life found a way to continue. The extinction opened up space in the ecosystems, both on land and in the oceans, for new groups to thrive. And it was the dinosaurs who were waiting for their moment. With the dominant Arosaur groups gone, the small, adaptable dinosaurs began to diversify and spread into the newly vacant ecological niches. They evolved into predators and herbivores, both large and small. The nimble bipeds that had been lurking in the background of the Triassic now began to take center stage. This wasn't a hostile takeover, but rather a quiet rising tide. The dinosaurs didn't immediately overpower their competitors with brute force or size. They simply adapted more effectively to the challenges of their environment. While they weren't necessarily more advanced than the creatures that came before them, they were certainly more adaptable. In a world of unpredictable climate swings, unstable ecosystems, and shifting landscapes, adaptability became the ultimate survival strategy. And in that regard, the dinosaurs had a clear advantage. This pattern of extinction clearing the field for new life has been a recurring theme throughout Earth's history. Life builds, collapses, and builds again. Each time, new creatures arise with different strategies and new possibilities. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction was no exception. It not only cleared the way for dinosaurs, but also for modern coral reefs, new marine predators, and even the early ancestors of mammals. As Earth slowly stabilized, the Jurassic period began with a dramatic transformation. The warming climate, lush vegetation, and the slow but steady separation of continents set the stage for the rise of new ecosystems. The dinosaurs, having endured through the extinction, began to flourish. The Earth had given them a chance to expand, and expand they did, dominating the land for the next 135 million years. But before they could dominate, they were part of a much larger group of reptiles, known as the Arosaurians. This group, which included early crocodile-like creatures, flying pterosaurs, and the precursors to dinosaurs, had already made their mark during the Triassic period. In the early days, it was the pseudo-Suchians relatives of modern crocodiles that seemed to rule the land. These creatures were formidable. Some were fierce predators, others massive herbivorous tanks, and some were specialized ambush predators that thrived in the water. For a time, it seemed that the pseudo-Suchians had the upper hand. They were well adapted to the world as it was, and they held the balance of power in the Triassic ecosystems. But nature has a way of rewriting the script. With the massive volcanic eruptions and the shifting climate that followed, the rules changed. Many of the dominant Aerosaur species didn't survive the rapid environmental upheavals. The forests shifted, the atmosphere churned with toxins, and the previously familiar rhythms of life faltered. In the wake of this change, the dinosaurs, small, overlooked creatures before the extinction rose. The ecological stage, once crowded with competitors, was now open, and the dinosaurs were poised to step into the newly vacated roles. This wasn't the beginning of a violent battle for supremacy, but rather an opportunity that allowed the dinosaurs to thrive in a way they never could have before. The extinction cleared out many of the animals that had previously overshadowed them. The dinosaurs, now free from competition, began to diversify rapidly. They filled every available ecological niche, from predators with sharp claws and teeth to herbivores with massive bodies and armored skin. The once modest, bipedal dinosaurs grew into the towering sauropods, the armored stegosaurs, and the fierce theropods, which would dominate the Jurassic period. What makes the rise of the dinosaurs particularly fascinating is not just their size or strength, but their adaptability. The dinosaurs had the physical traits, upright limbs, efficient lungs, and lightweight but strong skeletons that allowed them to thrive in a variety of environments. But they also had the behavioral flexibility to take advantage of the shifting landscapes. They could eat different types of food, move through different environments, and reproduce efficiently. These traits made them ideal survivors in a world that was constantly changing. And yet, the rise of the dinosaurs wasn't the end of the story. Life, ever persistent, continued to adapt and diversify. Early mammals, though small and hidden in the shadows, were quietly evolving alongside the dinosaurs. These early mammals, descended from synapsids like Lystrosaurus, were nocturnal, insectivorous, and tiny, more like the rodents of today than the larger, more prominent creatures of the future. They lived in the niches left behind by the larger, more dominant reptiles, using their small size and warm-blooded metabolism to survive in the cooler, nighttime hours. While dinosaurs ruled the daylight, mammals carved out their quiet existence in the shadows. Their small size allowed them to stay hidden from the larger predators, and their warm-blooded nature gave them an advantage in colder climates. This strategy of surviving in the shadows would prove invaluable in the long term. While the dinosaurs were dominating the Earth, the mammals were quietly evolving, waiting for their time to come. As the dinosaurs grew and diversified, so too did the mammals. Their small size and nocturnal habits allowed them to thrive in the harshest of conditions, and they would eventually evolve into a wide variety of forms. But that story, the story of mammals rising to prominence, would not begin for millions of years. For now, the dinosaurs were the undisputed rulers of the Earth. The Jurassic period was a time of explosive creativity. The extinction of so many dominant species allowed evolution to experiment with new ideas, new body plans, and new ways of life. The dinosaurs were the stars of this show, but they weren't the only act. The oceans began to recover as well, and with them, the first true coral reefs, a sign of the planet's slow return to health. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction, though devastating, opened the door to an era of unprecedented growth and experimentation. The dinosaurs would go on to dominate the Earth for millions of years, shaping ecosystems and evolving into creatures of unimaginable size and diversity. But they didn't take the throne by force. They took it by surviving, by adapting, and by waiting for the right moment. And when that moment came, they were ready. This is evolution. Not only through invention, but by subtraction, an evolution reshaped by the vast losses of life and the new opportunities that arose in the wake of destruction. The extinction event that occurred allowed for a fresh start, clearing the board in such a way that dinosaurs found themselves in the right place at the right time. This was not a simple matter of overcoming rivals. It was a result of circumstance, timing, and adaptation. The extinction allowed the dinosaurs to rise, not because they were necessarily more powerful than their competitors, but because the world tilted, the climate shifted, and their competitors, once dominant, were no longer there to contest their place. In a way, the Jurassic period was less a grand, triumphal march, and more the result of a cosmic accident. Had the massive volcanic eruptions and climate shifts that brought an end to the Triassic not occurred, it's quite possible that the dinosaurs would have remained side characters in the story of the Earth. Other reptiles, like the pseudoeons, might have continued to dominate, and dinosaurs might have never had the chance to take center stage. However, the planet tilted in the right direction. The world was no longer the same, and the dinosaurs inherited the Earth in a way that few other species ever could have imagined. And that was the moment when the age of dinosaurs began. Their rule would stretch across more than 130 million years, from the beginning of the Jurassic to the end of the Cretaceous, shaping every corner of the Earth from the polar regions to the equatorial swamps. Dinosaurs didn't just survive, they thrived. From icy polar forests to hot and humid rainforests, they adapted to every environment, evolving into the largest animals ever to walk the Earth. They were not merely large, they were also clever, responsive to environmental challenges, and in many cases, highly social. As a result, they filled every ecological niche that the Earth could offer. And although their story would end in disaster of a different sort, the curtain had risen for them. The Earth would never be the same again. As the Triassic period came to a close and the Jurassic began, the planet seemed to take a collective, deep breath. After millions of years of volcanic eruptions, extinction events, and the reshuffling of evolutionary forces, the Earth was starting to settle. The supercontinent Pangaea continued to drift apart, but the violent volcanic activity that had once shaken the planet had mostly quieted. The climate, once erratic and punishing, began to mellow. Rainfall increased, and temperatures stabilized. With this newfound calm, life slowly began to re-establish itself on Earth. However, when life returned, it came back bigger than before. The Jurassic period, beginning around 200 million years ago, marked the dawn of lush fern-covered landscapes, towering conifer forests, and the resurgence of animal life in forms that would have seemed almost otherworldly to those living in the Triassic. What emerged was a world that, while familiar in some ways, felt like a different place entirely. The early Jurassic was a time of dramatic transformation, a time when life not only bounced back from catastrophe but also took on forms that dwarfed anything that had come before. Across the open meadows and forested valleys, the Earth was blanketed in greenery, like a great, sweeping tide. Though the Earth was not yet adorned with flowering plants, which would come much later, ferns, cycads, and other ancient plants began to dominate the landscape. These plants, while not as complex as their later descendants, provided the perfect food sources for a new wave of herbivores. And it was within these herbivores that the world's most iconic creatures began to take shape, the sauropods. With necks like cranes, tails like whips, and legs like tree trunks. Sauropods were not just large, they were magnificent. Some, like Diplodocus, stretched over 25 meters from head to tail, while others, like Brachiosaurus, reached up to the canopy with their incredibly long necks, calmly grazing on the high branches of conifers. These creatures moved in slow, lumbering herds, and their massive footsteps shaped the land they walked upon. The sheer size of these giants still fascinates scientists today. How did these animals grow so large? And what enabled them to thrive? The answer lies not just in their unique physiology-efficient lungs, rapid growth rates, and metabolism that may have shared characteristics with modern birds, but also in the ecological conditions that supported such growth. The warm, stable climate of the Jurassic, with abundant food and no competing large herbivores, provided the ideal conditions for gigantism. With no other animals to rival them, sauropods grew to staggering sizes, filling the empty spaces left by earlier extinct species. As a result, they dominated the landscape, creating a world where size and strength were critical to survival. The sheer scale of these creatures made them not only awe-inspiring, but also crucial components of the ecosystem, shaping their environment with every step. Yet, these gentle giants were not without their challenges. Carnivorous theropods, such as Allosaurus, were quick to exploit the weakness of the young or the sick. These hunters were sleek, agile, and perfectly adapted to a world filled with giants. Though they were not as famous as their later relatives, such as Tyrannosaurus rex, these early theropods were formidable predators in their own right. They moved with speed and precision, using sharp teeth and hunting strategies that allowed them to thrive in an environment dominated by giants. However, the world of the Jurassic wasn't confined to the land. As dinosaurs ruled the continents, other reptiles laid claim to the oceans. Ichthyosaurs, dolphin-like reptiles, glided through the water with streamlined bodies and large, sensitive eyes. They were well adapted to an aquatic life, giving birth to live young and excelling in their swimming abilities. Ichthyosaurs came in all shapes and sizes, from small fish chasers to massive leviathans rivaling modern whales. Another marine reptile group, the plesiosaurs, also flourished in the Jurassic seas. With their long necks, stout bodies, and flippered limbs, they became an iconic part of the marine ecosystem. Some plesiosaurs had short heads and sharp teeth for catching fish, while others, like Elasmosaurus, had long necks, which they used to catch prey in shallow waters. These marine reptiles became the stuff of legend, long before human mythologies would attach them to lake monster tales. The marine food chains of the Jurassic period were dynamic and complex. Ammonites, with their spiral-shaped shells and tentacled mouths, flourished once again after their decline during previous extinction events. These ammonites became key prey for many marine reptiles, further weaving a rich tapestry of life under the sea. Sharks and bony fish diversified, contributing to the energy-filled dynamics of the oceans. Coral reefs, still in their early stages, began to reappear and offer shelter for countless species. The oceans that had been quiet and barren after past extinctions were now teeming with life. Back on land, the skies were also changing. The first pterosaurs took to the air, their wings stretched over elongated fingers, allowing them to soar above the ground. Some pterosaurs were small and nimble, flitting over rivers like oversized dragonflies. Others would grow to wingspans that rivaled modern-day aircraft in later periods. Though pterosaurs were not technically dinosaurs, they were closely related. and their mastery of flight opened up new ecological possibilities. Their wings allowed them to conquer a new frontier, filling the skies with new shapes and abilities. Meanwhile, the mammals, still small and relatively inconspicuous, continued to evolve in the shadows of the towering reptiles. These early mammals had already been experimenting with warm-bloodedness, fur, and maternal care. Though they were minor players in the grand stage of the Jurassic period, their quiet adaptations would eventually set the stage for their rise to dominance much later. While the dinosaurs thrived in the daylight, the mammals continued to carve out their niche, adapting to a world ruled by giants and surviving by sticking to the shadows. In many ways, the Jurassic period was a time of extraordinary balance. Life had filled the gaps left by the previous extinction, and then some. The Earth's systems seemed to cooperate perfectly, with high levels of carbon dioxide creating a warm, humid climate that was ideal for plant growth. Sea levels rose, creating shallow inland seas and coastlines that supported diverse marine habitats. Rainfall patterns encouraged dense vegetation to spread across the globe, allowing for a rapid diversification of plant life. Even the continents, still connected, began to rift apart enough to create regional differences in flora and fauna. For Earth, the Jurassic period was the moment it hit its stride. It wasn't a perfect paradise, of course. There were still predators, droughts, and wildfires. But these challenges did little to disrupt the fundamental balance of the ecosystem. Life wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in ways that had never been seen before. Forests echoed with the sounds of early birds and chirping insects. The plains shook beneath the weight of sauropod herds. Reefs sparkled beneath the waves. And high above, pterosaurs soared through the skies, scanning the world below. The world the dinosaurs inherited wasn't given to them, it was earned. It was shaped by previous extinctions and forged through persistence. They rose in the wake of disaster, grew in the absence of rivals, and flourished in a world made fertile by volcanic ash and evolutionary luck. The Jurassic period wasn't just a time of survival. It was a time of extraordinary growth, both in terms of the diversity of life and the complexity of ecosystems. And while this period marked the zenith of dinosaur dominance, it wasn't the final chapter of Earth's story. Life, as it always does, would face new challenges, and the rise of the dinosaurs wouldn't last forever. But for now, their reign was unchallenged, and the planet would be shaped by their presence. They were not just survivors, they were the architects of a new world, and their legacy would echo through time, shaping not only the Earth, but the very course of life itself. The aftermath of the asteroid impact that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs wasn't a sudden, dramatic end. It was a slow unraveling, a long descent into a world changed beyond recognition. While it's easy to imagine such an extinction as one singular, explosive event, the truth is far more tragic and complicated. The impact itself was only the beginning. What followed was a series of cascading failures, a planetary collapse unfolding in real time. The ecosystems of the Earth, which had been finely tuned for tens of millions of years, suddenly came undone. Life was stretched to its breaking point, and many creatures, unable to adapt, fell silent. Herbivores, once thriving on the abundance of vegetation, found themselves with no food to consume. The plants, unable to cope with the immediate aftermath of the disaster, began to die off. Meanwhile, the carnivores found fewer and fewer prey. Without the intricate balance of ecosystems, the top predators were left struggling. In the oceans, where plankton blooms had once fueled the food chains, filter feeders starved. Coral reefs, which had taken millions of years to evolve, faded into ghosts. The oceans, so rich in life, were suddenly bereft of their former vibrancy, leaving behind a barren, desolate scene. What had once been a thriving, interconnected system now lay in ruins. It wasn't just one catastrophic moment that marked the end. It was a gradual, painful process that left the planet reeling. This wasn't a single fiery explosion or an instantaneous change. It was an extinction wrought through slow, painful collapse. Picture it as an extinction by 1,000 cuts, each contributing to the larger unraveling of life on Earth. One failure fed into another, as ecosystems that had taken millions of years to develop slowly disintegrated. Yet, in the shadow of this profound catastrophe, life found a way to endure. The creatures that survived the event weren't the towering dinosaurs or the great marine reptiles. No, the survivors were small, unassuming, adaptable creatures that were able to weather the storm in ways their larger cousins couldn't. Tiny mammals, for example, had already been around for tens of millions of years before the asteroid struck. In the age of the dinosaurs, they had remained in the margins, living in the underbrush, hiding in burrows, and preying on insects. They were small and inconspicuous, not flashy or formidable. But when the asteroid hit, their small size and resourcefulness became their greatest assets. Many mammals likely found shelter underground or in rock crevices, places that could shield them from the blast, the firestorms, and the shockwaves that ravaged the planet. Their small size meant they required less food, and their varied diets ranging from seeds to insects to carrion gave them the flexibility to survive in a world suddenly devoid of food sources. Their ability to hibernate or enter states of torpor also helped them conserve energy during the harshest periods. But perhaps the greatest advantage they had was their warm-blooded metabolism. Mammals, unlike cold-blooded reptiles, can regulate their body temperature. In a rapidly cooling world, this was a life-saving trait. While cold-blooded animals struggled with the plummeting temperatures and the loss of sunlight, mammals could remain active, hunt at night, and maintain their internal body temperature. As the world grew colder, they could adapt more easily to the changing conditions. Birds, too, had their moment. Technically speaking, birds are dinosaurs. They are the last living lineage of the great dinosaur empire. Their ancestors had already developed beaks, feathers, and the ability to fly before the asteroid impact, which provided them with an edge when disaster struck. However, not all birds survived the event. Many of the larger, more specialized species with narrow diets or complex nesting habits vanished along with their non-avian relatives. The survivors were typically small, generalist species that were able to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. Some may have fed on seeds, which, unlike the rest of the plants, could persist long after the others died. Others may have foraged on detritus or insects that could still be found in the wreckage of the old world. Their feathers insulated them from the cold, and many were able to fly to new areas in search of food and shelter. From these scrappy survivors, a great diversity of birds would eventually emerge, ranging from the humble house sparrow to the mighty eagle, from penguins to ostriches. This, in essence, is what mass extinctions do. They prune the tree of life, leaving behind only a few survivors. What regrows from that devastation is often unexpected and unfamiliar. Evolution doesn't follow a predetermined path. It works with whatever it has left. The oceans, too, had to go through a massive reset. With plankton decimated and marine reptiles wiped out, the oceans had to rebuild slowly from the ground up. While some bony fish, sharks, and rays managed to survive, It would take millions of years for marine ecosystems to return to their former complexity. Coral reefs eventually reappeared, but the oceans were still a long way from what they had been before the impact. On land, the landscape had changed drastically. The towering ferns and conifers that had once dominated the Mesozoic era were now joined by a botanical revolution. Flowering plants, known as angiosperms, began to proliferate. Though they had been around for some time before the extinction event, the disappearance of their competitors allowed them to explode in diversity. Grasses, fruit-bearing shrubs, and trees with blossoms began to reshape the land, adding color and complexity to a world that had once been dominated by more ancient forms of plant life. With these new plants came new herbivores. Mammals began to diversify rapidly, filling the ecological roles once held by the dinosaurs. Some mammals grew larger, some became more specialized, and others developed entirely new ways of life. Primates, hoofed animals, rodents, and carnivores all began their slow rise during this period. It wasn't an instant explosion of new life, but rather a steady, determined march into the void left by the Great Extinction. Over time, life adapted and evolved, finding new niches and creating a world that was, though drastically different, still recognizable in many ways. The Earth we know today, with its forests, birds, mammals, and the vast majority of life we see around us, is built on the bones of the dinosaurs. Without that cataclysmic asteroid strike, the world might still be ruled by dinosaurs. Mammals might have remained small, nocturnal creatures, and humans might never have evolved. But the asteroid struck, and in the aftermath, a new world bloomed. This event, while tragic and destructive, also sparked an extraordinary resurgence of life. It is a story not just of destruction but of resilience, the story of life's ability to begin anew, even when all seems lost. The extinction marked the end of an era, but it also marked the beginning of another. The survivors, though few, were the seeds from which a new world would grow. In the months and years following the impact, life slowly began to find its way forward. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible recovery at first, but gradually, the world began to heal. The forests that once ruled the earth turned to ash, but they gave way to new, more resilient forms. Birds, mammals, and small reptiles, with their adaptability and resourcefulness, would lead the charge into a new era. In the grand scheme of Earth's history, this event was just one chapter, albeit a monumental one. Life did not end with the extinction. It was merely rewritten. And as life adapted and evolved, a new world emerged, not from the ashes of the old, but from the space left behind. The Earth we inhabit today is the result of this great upheaval, shaped not just by the forces of destruction, but by the quiet persistence of life itself. And that, in the end, is the most remarkable thing about our world. No matter how many times life has been brought to the brink, it always finds a way to begin again. Lineages began branching out into a wide variety of forms, and each new branch represented the unfolding potential of life on Earth. Some animals moved into the trees, developing grasping limbs, opposable thumbs, and stereoscopic vision. These adaptations marked the emergence of the first primates. The evolutionary leap into the trees opened up a new realm of possibility for creatures that had once been bound to the ground. Others ventured into open grasslands, evolving speed, agility, and specialized teeth suited for grazing on the grasses that covered vast plains. Some animals took to burrowing into the earth, evolving sharp claws, while others took to the skies, perfecting flight. In the oceans, whales returned to the sea, adapting to a fully aquatic lifestyle, their evolution spurred by a long-forgotten ancestor. Bats, likewise, took to the skies, becoming masters of flight and bringing with them unique adaptations for nocturnal life. Elephants grew tusks and trunks, developing the ability to manipulate objects, while cats, dogs, bears, rodents, and apes all found their path forward in the evolving ecosystems. This period of life after the Great Extinction wasn't merely a random scattering of evolutionary outcomes. Instead, it was the evolutionary equivalent of a game of musical chairs, an intense scramble for resources and space, each species trying to find its place in a world that had been reshaped by catastrophe. After the end of the dinosaurs and other massive creatures, nature didn't simply provide a blank slate. Instead, it demanded innovation and rapid adaptation. The survivors had to evolve quickly to fill ecological niches left empty by the extinction of the giants. Mammals, for example, were perfectly poised for this adaptive radiation. Traits such as live birth, fur for insulation, and the ability to regulate body temperature gave mammals a distinct advantage in the post-extinction world. These features not only helped mammals survive in a changing climate, but they also gave them the versatility to thrive in a variety of environments, from frigid tundras to tropical rainforests. Unlike reptiles, which are cold-blooded and rely on external temperatures to regulate their body heat, mammals were warm-blooded, allowing them to stay active and hunt even in cooler climates. In addition to these physiological advantages, mammals possessed relatively large brains. This allowed for more complex behaviors and problem-solving abilities. Intelligence, as it turns out, is a crucial survival tool. When life is thrown into turmoil, intelligence and adaptability become essential for survival, and mammals, with their relatively large brains and nimble bodies, were able to capitalize on these traits. Over millions of years, mammals began to diversify rapidly, moving into new environments, developing new feeding strategies, and evolving into a wide range of forms. Some became apex predators, others burrowed underground, while many others took to the sky or the seas. It is in this post-extinction environment that humans eventually descended from primates, creatures who had once swung through the Eocene forests. We are the product of one evolutionary gamble after another. Our opposable thumbs, social behaviors, language skills, and large brains are the result of millions of years of evolution, with each step forward not happening despite catastrophe, but in part because of it. This strange and slightly humbling truth means that human existence, our ability to sit comfortably and listen to a podcast about sleepy science, hinges not on random chance, but on 5 mass extinction events. Each of these events reshaped the planet, created space for new forms of life, and forced life to start again from a narrower base. Without the Ordovician-Cambrian extinction event, vertebrates may never have evolved the diversity needed to colonize land. Without the Devonian crisis, the early tetrapods might never have left the swamps to become the amphibians and reptiles that eventually ruled the Earth. Without the Great Dying at the end of the Permian, the ancestors of dinosaurs and crocodiles might have been shut out of evolutionary history entirely. Without the Triassic-Jurassic extinction turnover, dinosaurs might have remained small, obscure reptiles, rather than the towering giants that would dominate the planet for more than 150 million years. And without the asteroid impact 66 million years ago, the dinosaurs would still be roaming the Earth today, and mammals might still be hiding in the underbrush, nibbling on insects and berries. It's hard to overstate the cosmic absurdity of it all. The end of one world makes room for another, and this cycle of destruction and renewal is the heartbeat of life on Earth. Mass extinctions are not the final chapters of life's story. They are merely clearing the stage for something new. As painful, brutal, and horrifying as they may be, these cataclysmic events also spark creativity, allowing life to rebuild in ways that would have been impossible otherwise. Evolution does not mourn what has been lost. It builds from what remains. The survivors of each extinction, the small, the overlooked, the fringe dwellers, and the underdogs, become the founders of a new era. Every extinction has left its mark on today's ecosystems. From the coral reefs that flourished in the aftermath of the mass extinctions, to the grasslands, rainforests, and tundras that cover our planet, the world we know today has been shaped by the echoes of the past. Even now, we live among the ghosts of creatures that once roamed the earth. Horseshoe crabs, for example, scuttle through the surf with bodies that have remained nearly unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. Ginkgo trees, with their fan-shaped leaves, once shaded the giant sauropods of the Jurassic. And deep within our own DNA, there are whispers from the creatures that survived in the shadows, quietly borrowing their time, determined to outlast catastrophe. It's important to remember, however, that extinction is not just an ancient tale. Today, biodiversity is under threat, once again, from habitat loss, climate change, pollution, and overexploitation. Species are vanishing at rates far above natural background levels. Some scientists believe we are already entering a sixth mass extinction event, but this time, it's driven not by volcanic eruptions or asteroid impacts, but by the actions of one particularly clever species: humans. The stark reality is that species are disappearing faster than new ones can emerge. Forests are shrinking, coral reefs are bleaching, and the climate is changing at a rate not seen in millions of years. But there's a silver lining in knowing the past. The fossil record is more than just a list of losses. It's a guide to resilience. It shows us how life comes back after devastation, how biodiversity rebounds, and how even the smallest, most overlooked creatures can sometimes end up shaping the future. By studying these patterns of survival and recovery, we can learn how to preserve more of what we have today, rather than allowing it to slip away into memory. So, as you drift off tonight, think about the forests you've walked through, the animals you've seen, and even the fact that you're here at all. All of it, the trees, the oceans, the birds, the mammals, and even the very fact that you exist came not in spite of catastrophe, but because of it. Life doesn't just endure, it transforms. And sometimes, the ashes of one world become the soil for the next. Mass extinctions don't send out invitations. They arrive unannounced, sometimes in a slow, suffocating whisper, other times with a planet-shaking roar. And when they do, they leave the Earth forever changed. We've followed the story of 5 such cataclysms, moments when life was pushed to the brink, when ecosystems unraveled, and evolution was forced to reboot. Each one left behind a transformed world, each one reminding us that life, beautiful and complex as it is, remains remarkably vulnerable. In the Ordovician Cambrian extinction, an icy grip squeezed life in the oceans, drawing sea levels down and oxygen out. Then came the Devonian crisis, a long, uneven slide into loss, likely nudged by forests and their unexpected influence on the oceans. The Permian-Triassic extinction, the worst of them all, nearly sterilized the planet with volcanic fire and atmospheric chaos. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction gave dinosaurs their window of opportunity. And finally, the Chicxulub impact 66 million years ago, an asteroid strike that cleared the path for mammals and eventually us. The statistics alone are staggering. 90% of marine species lost here, 70% of vertebrates gone there, entire clades vanished without a trace. Creatures that once ruled the seas or walked the land were reduced to fossil fragments and mysteries. But this isn't just a story of endings. Each extinction, as ruthless as it was, sparked creation. Nature isn't sentimental, but in an unflinching evolutionary sense, when ecosystems collapse, space is created for new life to emerge. Evolution, like water, finds a way to fill every crack. Out of those 5 collapses came astonishing innovation: jawed fish, land-walking tetrapods, flowering plants, birds, mammals, whales, primates, all rising from the ashes of what came before. Stripped to its essentials, life has a habit of getting inventive. But now, we find ourselves in a curious position. We are no longer just passengers in Earth's great experiment. We are participants, and increasingly, we are influencers. Many scientists believe we are currently in the midst of a 6th mass extinction, driven by human activity. Species are disappearing at a faster rate than new ones can emerge. Forests are shrinking, coral reefs are bleaching, and the climate is changing at an unprecedented rate. But unlike ammonites or trilobites or woolly mammoths, we have the power to recognize what's happening. More importantly, we have the power to choose a different outcome. It begins with understanding. By acknowledging that life on Earth is not guaranteed, that stability is a temporary gift, we can better care for the world we live in. The fossil record is a reminder etched in stone that no species, no matter how mighty, is immune to change. Even the mighty Tyrannosaurus had its last day. If there's one theme that has echoed through every extinction and recovery, it's resilience. Life returns. It may take millions of years, it may look completely different, but the spark of life is reignited. Microbes bubble up from deep vents, ferns crack through volcanic ash, and small mammals blink their eyes and scurry into a changed world, ready to begin again. It's a comforting thought, especially when we realize how improbable our existence is. The forests we walk through, the animals we see, even the fact that we're here at all of it came about not despite catastrophe, but because of it. Extinction, even when unintentional, is a heavy thing to push back against. But knowing the stakes makes the effort worthwhile. As you drift off tonight, consider the journey life has made, from trilobites and ammonites to fern-covered landscapes and lava fields, from firestorms to mammals creeping into a brave new world. Perhaps you'll wonder what traces of our time will remain, and who or what might read them. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember how deeply improbable it is that you exist at all. That your world, with its trees and oceans, music and cats, coffee and coffee shops, is the result of 5 enormous resets, 5 endings, 5 new beginnings. And through all of it, life carried on. So as you reflect, think of the stars above, watching silently, having seen it all. The asteroid fall, the continents split, the forests bloom, and the glaciers grind down mountains. And now, they watch us, stardust, learning to think, wonder, worry, and hope. And that means we can choose. We can choose to protect what remains, reduce the harm we cause, and pass on a richer world than the one we inherited. It won't be easy, but knowing the stakes, the effort is worth it. Tonight, as you drift off, perhaps your mind will linger on trilobites, ammonites, and the creatures that survived firestorms and flood. Maybe you'll wonder what traces of our time will remain for the future to read, and remember how improbably life endures. As you lay here, surrounded by the quiet embrace of the night, take a moment to feel the weight of all that has passed and all that is yet to come. The stars above us, old witnesses to the entire history of Earth, have seen it all: cataclysms, creation, and the slow, unrelenting march of time. They watched as the Earth was shaped and reshaped by disasters too vast for any one creature to truly comprehend. The asteroid that ended the reign of the dinosaurs, the shifting of continents, the rise and fall of ice ages, these are the silent stories etched in the very fabric of the universe. And now, those same stars look down on us, stardust that has learned to think, to dream, and to question. We are the product of a history that stretches across billions of years. Every decision, every action, no matter how small, echoes through time. Our ancestors were shaped by the forces of nature, the same forces that still guide our world today. But unlike the creatures of the past, we have the capacity to change the course of our future. The beauty of life is not just in surviving, but in our ability to reflect, adapt, and choose our path forward. As humans, we hold a unique responsibility. The choices we make now, in the face of our current environmental crises, will define the world for generations to come. And it is up to us whether we will be remembered for preserving the fragile ecosystems that still exist, or for allowing them to fade into the annals of history. Imagine, for a moment, what future generations might find when they look back on us. Will they see a species that learned from its past, that saw the devastating consequences of unchecked consumption and climate change, and made the difficult but necessary decisions to protect the planet? Or will they find the remnants of a world once rich with life, now a shadow of its former self? The choice is ours, but it is not an easy one. Our current path is fraught with challenges: habitat destruction, species extinction, rising temperatures, but it is also filled with opportunity. The same adaptability and resilience that have allowed life to thrive after each of Earth's great extinctions are within us as well. We have the power to evolve in ways that ensure the survival of not just humanity, but of the countless species that share this planet with us. We can choose to protect what remains. We can choose to heal the wounds we've inflicted on the environment. By making conscious decisions to reduce pollution, conserve resources, and protect biodiversity, we can begin to tip the scales in favor of the planet's future. We can choose to support the regeneration of ecosystems, to fight for clean air, clean water, and a healthier climate. But none of this will happen by accident. We must act with intention, with knowledge, and with the understanding that every action counts. And so, as you drift into sleep tonight, let your thoughts wander to the trilobites, ammonites, and all the other ancient creatures that once thrived but are now long gone. Think of the cataclysms they endured, the worlds they knew, and how life on Earth has always found a way forward. In their absence, life did not cease, it transformed. The oceans, once suffocating under layers of toxic gas and debris, eventually gave birth to new creatures. Forests regrew from the ashes of ancient fires. Species rose from the shadows of extinction, and against all odds, flourished. This is the story of life's resilience, of its unwavering drive to adapt, to evolve, and to survive. What remains now is our turn, our chance to ensure that, just as life has found a way through countless resets in the past, it will continue to find a way in the future. There is no guarantee that the Earth will remain as we know it, but there is one thing we can be sure of. As long as there is life, there is always hope. Hope that we can learn from our mistakes, that we can grow and adapt, and that we can make choices that will preserve the beauty and diversity of this planet for those who come after us. So, tonight, as you close your eyes, take comfort in the knowledge that you are part of this ongoing story. You are connected to the ancient past, to the creatures that walked the earth long before us, and to the future generations who will one day look back on our time. In the vastness of the cosmos, our time is but a fleeting moment, but in that moment, we have the power to shape the world. Let that thought guide you through the night and into a world of dreams where resilience, hope, and possibility are always within reach. Sleep well, knowing that the Earth's story, like your own, is far from finished. And when the sun rises tomorrow, let it remind you of the quiet strength that lies within us all. The strength to make a difference, to preserve what we can, and to move forward together into a brighter future.